anything. He couldn't think of anything to say. But that's what these are. The one on the left is winged corset and corseted wings. Several times I've worked at the paper studio. I've had some kind of special entrance into the paper studio at the School of Art and Craft. And so that is that. And the hats are part of a series of 22 hats of the women in my family. This is my Aunt Opal. Actually, a lot of actors have Aunt Opals also, I found out. But she is the aunt who lived only 50 miles from Neiman Marcus. And so this has a Neiman Marcus label inside. You can't see that.
And the other gown there, what is that?
The other gown is pedestal and bride, and you can see the pedestal is above the bride. And that pedestal, I found out later, I didn't know it, but it's an 18th century Spanish pedestal. A friend of mine who would know these things found a little fleck of cyan.
And is this supposed to be any particular bride, or is this a generic bride?
No, it was a particular bride.
You don't want to tell us anything more about that?
It's an ex-bride, an ex-wife in the family.
Okay.
I want to read you something here. This is Mother's chair. And I want to read what's on that plaque on the front of it. This chair is made of paper. And it's actually very much like my mother's chair.
And of course, it reminds me of the early painting you did of the chair as well.
Yes, I have a lot of things about chairs, I think, in my life. And it had the print on it, and that print was put on with little veils and so forth. And the reason I put it on such a tall pedestal was to, lift it up into the realm of art, of course, but also to keep people from sitting on it, because it looks so much like a real chair. And so this is what's on the brass plate. It says, purchased by Mr. and Mrs. Rittersbacher when they built their Corsicana home in 1922. The chair was upholstered in brown mohair. A matching sofa and wing chair completed the suite. Bought with the house in 1923 by Aunt Opal and Uncle Fred after Mr. Rittersbacher went bankrupt and Uncle Fred found oil. Uncle Fred bought minerals instead of taking leases. Some of his wells are still pumping. Given or bought by Mother and Daddy and moved to Waco circa 1936 when Aunt Opal refurbished her house the first time. Aunt Abby helped Mother to decorate our new home in Corpus Christi in 1945. The chair was slip-covered in a green print. Moved to Maryland, San Antonio home in 1986 when we closed Daddy's home in Waco, and he moved in with Ben and Cindy in Kerrville. Mother had died in 1978. Marilyn is searching for brown mohair. And I still do have that chair.
Okay, and now you made some more clothing pieces having to do with
here I was
your family
working
tree.
in the paper studio again. That photograph is a photograph of Marilyn and Ben, me and my brother, and we were dressed in little outfits that my mother sewed. I didn't mention that my mother and all the women in my family were seamstresses, and so I think that's one reason I deal with fabric so much. So this is 8 feet tall, and it's a replica of the little brown suits.
And you did something interesting in the titles of these.
Oh, well, yeah, that's Marilyn and Marilyn upside down, Marilyn right side up, Marilyn upside down, Ben and Ben. I can't do that, but David can do it. I can do it if I'm writing it, but I can't do it on the computer. The one on the right is Marjorie's story, jerry-rigged. and the one on the right is Daddy's 2 death stories, one of which really happened. I want to read what is written there on Marjorie's story. The story itself is embroidered on the towel that is the end of the table. It's like the one that's on the back porch by the well at my grandmother's house, was there. And so this is the story. This is about my Aunt Marjorie. She was the last of 7 children. When she was 1, she toddled into the fire. When she was 2, she moved into town. When she was 4, she threw a hissy fit on the front porch because she wanted to go out to the fields with her dad. He came back up the steps and gave her a swat with his glove. She ran under the cook table many a time to escape her mama's peach tree switch. When she was 14, she went to the Pentecostal church to laugh and stayed to join. She already has her tombstone in place. Her new heifer is named Tara Marie Nicole, after Sister Nancy's great-granddaughter. She should have been a boy. She learned how to plow but never learned to cook and clean. When you ask her how she feels, she says, better. I told you I found out about that story when I asked her when she said her first bad word. She told me about the hissy fit. The glove on the table is much bigger than Granddaddy's glove would have been. It's made of stone because it's the one that gave her a swat. And up in this edifice is her house, and it's her church. You can see it has a steeple on the back, and then it has handles on the side, so it's her coffin also.
And Daddy's double death?
Well, Daddy's double death story. Daddy, these are his 2 effigies. One is his 5-year-old effigy hanging above the bed, and one is his 85-year-old effigy. And the story is written on the window shade. That shade, the curtains are carved wood, and they're, about 5 feet tall. And then on the window shade is the story, and it is stenciled on the back of the window shade, and it can be read from the front. So the story is Daddy had pneumonia when he was 5, and the doctor, his Uncle Doc, came out, and after he'd examined Daddy, he and my grandmother went outside the house. So this piece has a wooden exterior, and it has 2 figures hanging there, grandmother and Uncle Doc. And without thinking, Uncle Doc said, well, I'll come back in the morning, but it won't do any good because he's not gonna live through the night. And they hadn't thought, but they stopped right outside his window, and Daddy overheard that. And I said, well, what did you think? And he said, I knew it wasn't true. And I burned that in the windowsill, and I knew it wasn't true.
And then the 85-year-old effigy?
That's his effigy in bed, is 85. Now I have some charts at the end of the bed, like an old-fashioned hospital chart. One of them gives his data, and the other one said, when he died, yeah, I've forgotten what the other one said, but the last one said, I wish I had my mother to take care of me for a couple of weeks. You know, your mother can kiss it and make it well. And this is every night she latched all the windows and locked all the doors and put the babies in her bed.
And who is she?
This is my grandmother.
And now this is one of your first major button works, right?
Yes, the first
Tell me,
major button.
where did that idea start to use these incredible vintage buttons?
I don't know exactly, except my grandmother was a seamstress. That's how she earned her living. And I was moving back and forth to Portland and Eugene, Oregon. I was teaching and driving back. I always counted San Antonio's home, but I was driving back and forth. I know it stopped at every possible venue to buy buttons. And
But there had to be a certain kind of button, right?
they had to be mother of pearl buttons, vintage mother of pearl buttons, or the color, the Afghan across the bed is bone buttons. And those were about that same time, the early 1900s. And I have button vendors in California and in Dallas and in Houston.
Do you get them over eBay now?
I don't. You know, I tried to do that, but once I ordered a package of genuine mother of pearl buttons, and they were plastic.
Oh my!
And I could tell. I really thought they were before I ordered them, but I could look at the picture and tell. Plastic buttons. If you had a bowl of buttons and you went like this through them, they'd kind of float. Plastic, but they're very good at making fake plastic mother of pearl buttons, but they don't have the same weight and look. I'm an expert on looking at buttons now. And my grandmother was a seamstress since the sewing machine, and there's my grandfather. He's shot and killed. You can see he's cut off the picture on the wall. And then there's another, the little round picture on the wall is of my Aunt Alla Mae. My grandmother married again and had another child, and so that's that child. You know, in the Renaissance portraits of the royal family, the babies who died were those little cherubs up there, you know, either in the clouds or holding the drapes, because you had to account for everybody. And I thought I should account for my Aunt Luati. I didn't think she was going to raise an army and come across the channel, but I thought I should account for her. And otherwise, the babies in the bed, that's my father.
Some more lead pieces, I believe?
I have done a number of children's clothes in little antique children's chairs, and they represent.
The chair hangs on the wall, correct?
Yeah, it can hang on the wall. It could sit on the floor, but I usually hang them on the wall. Oh, thank you.
Bah humbug.
Bah humbug. Thank you. Thank you.
How funny. Okay.
Okay. And the one on the right is the Dion quintuplets. You know, I was thinking about music one day, and I don't ever duplicate anything. You know, in music you do that all the time. So I did the Dion quintuplets.
Okay, now we're going into your more recent work, where you've been working a lot with found objects. Tell us about this cabinet.
This is from a series from the linen faux reliquaries, profane. That is, they're not religious. And so each one of these cabinets represents someone in my family. This particular one represents Merle, my mother, who was a seamstress also. And so I carved the doors, had a cabinet made around them, and put something on the top shelf that represented that person, that was symbolic of that person. So these are little toy irons. Not that my mother liked to iron, but because my mother taught me so many practical things. And you can have the other three shelves to do with what you want. This is a library table with ink drawings. Both of my grandmothers had a table behind the sofa that had all of these family photographs. So it took me about 3 years to gather this many swing frames, you know, those old-fashioned frames from the 20s or 30s that could move. And those are all ink paintings based on family photographs.
You said you made the paintings.
I made the paintings.
Based on the photographs, put them in vintage frames of the period that reflects the family history.
Now, when I started making these drawings, they didn't look right to me. And then I finally figured out it's because I was looking at photographs, and they looked like drawings of photographs. And because I usually work from nature, and so they should look like photographs, because that's what they or supposed to be. This is headstones. This is Beck helped me make this. The table is made of paper, artist-made paper, and the hats on the table are limestone. They're very heavy.
And what does it refer to? Who are the hats referred to?
They would represent women in my family.
Generic?
Mm-hmm. Well, no.
No, specific women?
Particular women.
Oh, okay. So it's a kind of family portrait as well?
Yes.
Okay. And then this was installed here at SAMA.
Yeah.
And there's 3 large button collages and then 3 preparatory drawings. Let's look, though, at one of them in detail. So these are your 3 aunts, correct? I mean, the 3 wives of your uncle. Yeah.
The overall title is Uncle Clarence's 3 Wives. So this is the first wife, Aunt Billy. Part of the title is Billy Patterson Moore died in 1937 in the school explosion in New London, Texas. I tell the full name of the wife and something about her and where they lived. She lived in New London, Texas. The next wife lived in Paris, Texas, and the third wife lived in Cutoff, Louisiana, because I thought those were interesting places. Aunt Billy went to pick up her sister at the. Oh, well, I have to start over. This is 1937, during the Depression, and that big East Texas field had been discovered. And so that part of Texas was thriving, so much so that they decided to build a new school. They built a $1 million school in that little town, enough for the 300 children from grades 1 through 12. And then after a while, they started using green gas or wet gas to heat the building. That was before they built the pipelines to New Jersey. So I guess they were just flaring the gas. The oil was what was important. And so the school started using that gas. And then one day, about the time school was out, about 3 o'clock, the janitor plugged in the sander and a spark caused the building to explode. And almost 300 students and teachers were killed. It was such a disaster that Adolf Hitler wrote a letter of condolences to the city.
And Aunt Billy was?
Aunt Billy was killed. My uncle, they were a newly married couple, and he rushed over, as did everybody, to help, not dreaming that his wife was there. And I talked to a woman. Morgan had seen something in the paper when he was in Amarillo about this woman who died and had escaped this explosion, and I think she was in the 3rd grade. So I called her daughter. It was in the obituary, the information, and talked to the daughter, and she said her mother was in the 3rd grade and she was in practicing for a play. So the teacher let her out a few minutes early, and she was right at the door, and so missed the biggest part of the explosion. She was blown onto the hood of a car. She hurt her back, but they never did see about that, although she had back trouble all of her life, because they were so busy looking for her Aunt Helen, who was living with her family that year so that she could finish school. Henderson, where Helen lived, only went to the 8th grade, so she was living with her relatives, and Helen was killed. This is another, I used to make a lot of quick drawings, and I did quick paintings, quick watercolors, quick drawings, and it took me 3 years to make Uncle Clarence's 3 Wives, and I had a lot of help to make it. I had about 13 or 14 women who stayed with me the entire time, taking their turn at sewing every week, and seemed to enjoy it. I mean, one of them would go to China on a trip, and she could hardly wait to get back and get back to the sewing.
Gives new meaning to the
Yeah.
sewing circle.
Right. But it took me also 3 or 4 years to this is my collection of measuring devices. And it took me 3 or 4 years to collect these. So I had a table made, which is about 4 feet by 8 feet. And it has lucite, actually like a glass cover, very much like might be at the, once was at the Pioneer Museum down by the Whitty. And this is full, as you can see.
And did you spend a
measuring
lot of
devices.
time working on the composition? Was it random? Was it very calculated?
It was calculated, and Morgan helped me, and he's got a good eye. And I also, it took a long time to name them all, because I
To
can
name each part?
Yeah, I
each
can
device?
recognize a measuring device when I see it, but do I know what it's useful for? I don't know. So I have names of all of these, but I don't have them on the piece because this is not a museum exhibit. It's an art exhibit.
It's a form of collage,
Yes.
assemblage.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's a tiny number on each one, and if you look in this magic book, you can find out what its name is and what it's used for. That took a long, long time. And no, it's just, it is a collage. And it's a beautiful thing.
And I think you wanted to end with,
yes, I
these
wanted,
words from
yes,
your one-year performance.
Yes, okay. I'm sorry I don't have the actual thing, just this drawing. One day when I went out to run, I found a talisman on the street, and I brought it home, and I recorded where I found it, the corner of Van Diver and something, something.